Well, very bad news for Donald Trump in Washington today, with the Washington Post reporting that Special Prosecutor Jack Smith has obtained previously unrevealed evidence, publicly anyway, of possible obstruction of justice in Donald Trump's hoarding of government documents at his Florida home, including what prosecutors have called a dress rehearsal for the possible crime of obstruction of justice. Also in Washington today, in federal court, the longest sentence for any convicted defendant in the January 6th attack on the Capitol was given to the man who believed he was acting as Donald Trump's field general in the attack on the Capitol, Elmer Stewart Rhodes, who will be 78 years old the next time he is free to attack the Capitol during a January 6th certification of the Electoral College vote. He was hit with an 18-year sentence for seditious conspiracy, which means that the next presidential election, when he will be a free man, is the 2044 presidential election. So on January 6th, 2045, when Elmer Rhodes is 78 years old, look for him with a bullhorn on the Capitol grounds if one of Donald Trump's children is not elected president that year. If Special Prosecutor Jack Smith brings charges against Donald Trump for seditious conspiracy, what does today's sentence mean for Donald Trump if he is convicted on the same charge that Elmer Rhodes just got 18 years for? Elmer Rhodes was convicted for essentially being the Trump field general on January 6th, but Donald Trump was the commander-in-chief of the attack on the Capitol. In court today, before he was sentenced, Elmer Rhodes, who hates his first name so much he has tried to obliterate it from public use, squeezed in an endorsement in the current presidential campaign saying, "I hope Trump wins in 2024. Elmer Stewart Rhodes would be the first in line for one of the pardons that Donald Trump has publicly promised to convicted January 6th defendants. And if Donald Trump is sworn in as president on January 20th, 2025, by that time, the first order of business might be pardoning himself in multiple federal cases that could be brought by Special Prosecutor Jack Smith. Of course, Donald Trump will never be able to pardon himself for any crimes that he might be convicted of in the state of Georgia, where Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis has indicated that if Donald Trump is going to be indicted there, it will likely occur in the first 2 weeks of August. We are at the, according to people familiar with the matter, stage of Special Prosecutor Jack Smith's investigation. That is the phrase used to describe the sources of today's Washington Post reporting about new evidence of obstruction of justice. And the identical phrase is used by Bloomberg in their report today saying, quote, Special Counsel Jack Smith is wrapping up his investigation into former President Donald Trump's refusal to return classified documents after his election defeat and is poised to announce possible criminal charges in the days or weeks after Memorial Day. The Washington Post is reporting that boxes were moved at Mar-a-Lago the day before Justice Department officials made their first visit to Donald Trump's home to obtain documents. That visit was agreeably arranged with Donald Trump's lawyers ahead of time. No search warrant was involved, and Donald Trump knew well in advance exactly when the Justice Department officials would arrive. And tonight, the Washington Post is reporting 2 of Donald Trump's employees moved boxes of papers the day before FBI agents and a prosecutor visited the former president's Florida home to retrieve classified documents in response to a subpoena, timing that investigators have come to view as suspicious and an indication of possible obstruction, according to people familiar with the matter. Trump and his aides also allegedly carried out a dress rehearsal for moving sensitive papers even before his office received the May 2022 subpoena according to people familiar with the matter who spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe a sensitive ongoing investigation. Prosecutors, in addition, have gathered evidence indicating that Trump at times kept classified documents in his office in a place where they were visible and sometimes showed them to others, these people said. Donald Trump is famously way too impatient to rehearse things like speeches, but the evidence seems to indicate that he was so determined to commit the crime of obstruction of justice that he personally directed the dress rehearsal of moving government documents illegally in his possession before the FBI might show up looking for them. The Post reports there is, quote, evidence showing that boxes of documents were moved to a storage area on June 2nd, just before senior Justice Department lawyer Jay Bratt arrived at Mar-a-Lago with agents. The June 3rd visit by law enforcement officials was to collect material in response to the May 2022 grand jury subpoena demanding the return of all documents with classified markings. Prosecutors also have gathered evidence that even before Trump's office received the subpoena in May, he had what some officials have dubbed a dress rehearsal for moving government documents that he did not want to relinquish. People familiar with the investigation said the term dress rehearsal was used in a sealed judicial opinion issued earlier this year in one of several legal battles over the government's access to particular witnesses and evidence. Some of the people said the dress rehearsal could be extremely damning evidence of obstruction of justice, which carries a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. The Washington Post also reports prosecutors separately have been told by more than one witness that Trump at times kept classified documents out in the open in his Florida office where others could see them, people familiar with the matter said, and sometimes showed them to people, including aides and visitors.
Did you ever show those classified documents to anyone?
Not really. I would have the right to. By the way, they were declassified after. Not that I can think of. Let me just tell you, I have the absolute right to do whatever I want with them. I have the right.